So tonight our program is called Middle East Perspectives, which is a pretty wide-ranging topic, but we have a speaker uniquely qualified tonight to lead us in a walk around that volatile region of the world. And somebody said, hey, what an incredible coincidence of events that brought General Moseley to us at such a critical time in that part of the country. So I know we're all looking to see what he's going to say. So let me say a few words about General Moseley. He concluded his 40-year-plus career in 2008. He was the 18th Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. He was a senior airman in our military, advisor to the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. During his career, he flew combat and commanded forces in many of the world's hotspots. He was commander of U.S. Air Forces in the Middle East after 9/11 and planned and executed the air wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, including precision strikes which helped defeat the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and the shock and awe campaign. I use that in parentheses because I don't think he ever called it that, but that's what the press called it. That kicked off, of course, Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003. General Moseley has served at the highest military levels and positions all around the world. He's a recipient of more U.S. and foreign awards that we have time to recount here, including being knighted by the Queen of England, for His Majesty the Queen of England. He's a graduate of Texas A&M University. He's a native of Grand Prairie. In 2007, the city of Grand Prairie honored him by naming a public school after him, the Knight Moseley Elementary School. He's currently serves as chairman of the Hillwood Aviation with offices in Texas and activities on a global scale. And before I present him to you, I want to tell a quick personal story and make an apology. A couple of weeks before the war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq kicked off, General Moseley, of course, was the component commander for U.S. Central Command, the air commander. And a few weeks before the operation kicked off, he invited a number of senior officers to come down to Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, and hear what the air war was going to look like. So we sat around an enormous conference table in the commander's office at Langley Air Force Base, Air Combat Command, and he walked us through what became the shock and awe campaign. And at the end of that campaign, his staff brought out trays of shot glasses with this noxious liquor in it. And we all, at that point, stood up. We drank a toast to the success of the air war, but more importantly, to the lives of the young men and women that he was going to send into combat in just a couple of weeks. So when he was here in January, I said, hey, General Moseley, would you come back and speak to our group? I said, if you do, I will find a bottle of Jeremiah weed and have it for you. Well, here comes the apology part. It turns out that they quit making that stuff, for good reason, actually. They quit making that stuff a couple of years ago, and I scoured the internet. I went to every big box store in the area trying to find a bottle stuck back someplace, and I could not find a bottle. However, way back in the recesses of my closet, I found a bottle, and that's what's in it. So there's not much, but it is enough, and maybe after we're done here, we can put this to rest. Ladies and gentlemen, Lady General Buzz Moseley.
Soup, thank you. Let me offer a thought about Jeremiah weed. There's a reason they don't make that stuff anymore. There's not too many things that you can drink while you're cleaning a paintbrush or stripping furniture with the same liquid. That's Jeremiah weed. Guys, thank you all for the invitation. It couldn't be more timely. Soup and I talked about this when we were part of giving Darcy Anderson a well-deserved award, and we were talking about, well, maybe we spend a little time talking about the Middle East. I said, sure, that'll be fine. What could go possibly wrong there? Well, here we are. So what I would like to do is go through a little bit of this to put it in context about today and some of the historical things that I think everybody knows, but when you begin to kind of connect this up, things began to make sense. But first, for all of my ROTC youngsters out there, specifically all of those that go to that bastion of Western civilization, the center of the known universe, Texas A&M University, let me offer you another thought. We had a chance to chat a while ago, share some thoughts, but what I'd like for all of you folks to think about is to have some options and to think about what you want to do and the places you want to be and your families. And here's something that I'm sure General Campbell doesn't know. When I was at A&M, when I was in high school and then at A&M, I had in my own mind options on 4 different things that I wanted to do in life. And I'll share those with you. One was I wanted to be an Air Force fighter pilot. Okay, that was my plan. Second, my backup plan was professional bull rider. But I had an unfortunate incident down at Mansfield in a rodeo where about a 12 or 13 pound Bramer bull came pretty close to hurting me. And you think it's only 8 seconds, but no, it's much, much more than 8 seconds. My third backup was to be a NASCAR driver. When I was in high school, I had a 57 Chevy with a 283 power pack and a 411 rear end. And I was doing pretty good racing that thing until my dad caught me and took it away from me. So that ended my NASCAR life. And then my last option, I wanted to be a country singer, but what really limited me there is I can't sing and I have no skill with an instrument. So it brought me back full circle to be a fighter pilot. So what I would suggest to you is always have a backup. Be realistic. Professional bull rider didn't work out, the NASCAR thing didn't work out, and the country singer thing didn't work out, so I thought, well, hell, I'll just fly fighters. Well, let's talk about this a little bit. A map of the Middle East, if you think Iran, Turkey, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the Mediterranean. So why does that matter? There was a Persian empire that ran all the way from the Hindu Kush Mountains in eastern Afghanistan all the way up to Greece. If you remember the battles at Marathon and Thermopylae that stopped the Persians from going up into Europe. But there was a Persian empire that lasted a few hundred years, and it covered most of that map. There was a Turkish empire. It was called the Ottomans. And if you think about the Turkish Empire, it went up into the Balkans, all the way up into what we now see as Kosovo and Serbia, etc., Bosnia, and it came all the way down the west coast of Saudi Arabia, the Red Sea, down into the Arabian Gulf, and over into Iraq. And that was called the Ottoman Empire, Turks. The Prophet Muhammad died in 632, and as my Islamic friends say, the Prophet, peace be upon him, died in 632, and by 670 the Arabs had taken Jerusalem. 670 to 680, the Arab influence ran all the way to the Atlantic, from Morocco up halfway into Spain, all the way across the Mediterranean, down through the Arabian Peninsula. Now, why does this matter? And this is where I really want to kind of spend some time with you. Iran, today's Iran, is Persian. I had a chance when I was a youngster to fly with the Imperial Iranian Air Force, and I really enjoyed those guys. It's a culture rich in poetry, music, literature, wonderfully warm people. I really enjoyed them. Those guys are all dead now because the fundamentalists killed them. But the Iranians are Persian, and every one of them remember what it was like to have an empire, the Persian Empire. The Arabs on the other side of the Arabian Gulf are Arabs. They're not Persian. Persians are not Arabs. And they're very clear about that. Persians will tell you up front, Iranians will tell you up front, I am not Arab. The Arabs will tell you up front, I am not Iranian. The Turks, who have a very fond memory of the Ottoman Empire, in fact, about 5 years ago, I was with the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who literally gave me a white paper as to why the United States should support a return of the Ottoman Empire. Wow. My next stop was into the Emirates, and I had a chance to spend a day or two with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, who is now the guy running the United Arab Emirates, and I gave him the white paper. He got about a third of the way through it and said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, just telling you what is going on out here. So you had a Persian empire, an Ottoman Turkish empire, and an Arab empire. Now, why is that important? Well, I'll come back to a part of this. It is in the intersection, in the crossroads of Europe, Asia, Africa. It is an intersection in the crossroads of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. It is geographically center for trade, for waterways, for largest proven oil reserves. Everything about today's world can center on this. I mean, you can go back to the historic players in this, from the Canaanites to the Egyptians, Greeks, Assyrians, all the way back through pre-biblical days, and it comes back to this area. In fact, Jerusalem, which all three faiths claim, has 5,000 years of recorded history of humans living in that place. 3,000 of those with Jewish presence. 3,000 years of Jewish presence. The city's been attacked 52 times. It's been captured and recaptured 44 times, besieged 33 times, and completely destroyed twice. So now let's turn to the religious part of this. The Iranians are Shia Muslims. Everyone else out here are Sunni Muslims. There's a big difference. The Shia Muslims believe you have to be in the bloodline of the Prophet to hold a leadership position within the faith. The Sunnis do not. In an interesting twist, the only two groups of people today that are in the literal bloodline of the Prophet are the Hashemites in Jordan and Morocco. The Shias in Iran, who believe you have to be in the bloodline of the Prophet, are not even close to being in the bloodline of the Prophet. About 85% of the Muslim faith are Sunni, but the majority of the Shia live in Iran. They don't like each other. I don't know how many hours I've spent in the desert with people of the royal family of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, listening to them about their sense of Shia and the Iranians. Really, hatred. So inside the faith, there is this massive schism. And inside each of those, Sunni, Shia, there is another schism. And it is relative to the attributes of the faith. Do we return to the attributes of the 13th century, or do we go forward? Because remember, inside the Muslim faith, inside Islam, there has never been a reformation, there's never been a Renaissance, there's never been a Martin Luther inside that faith. So there is a large percentage of the faithful that believe that everything that's happened to them bad is a result that they've strayed from the attributes of the faith as defined by somewhere around the 11th or 12th century. There is a smaller group that believe That's behind us. We need to go forward. We need to look for accommodation. We need to look for friends. We need to look for working with the rest of the world. And so that context, the spiritual crossover between Jewish faith in Jerusalem, and remember, the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple on the Mount are in the exact location where the first and second temple were. The people that control the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Temple on the Mount refuse to let archaeologists up onto the Mount to do research because they officially claim, there has never been Jewish presence in that part of Jerusalem. There never will be research or archaeological digs to prove any different. Then you've got the Christian side of this. And remember, in the early 11th century, the Crusades, Europeans took Jerusalem and held it for a couple of hundred years and created the Kingdom of Jerusalem. But before that, it was Jewish, and then it was Greek, then it was Roman, etc. And then after about 680 or so, it was Arab, then it was Christian, then it was back to being Arab. And then World War I occurs and really confuses things because you have a consortium between the European powers, primarily the Brits and the French, who declare the Balfour Declaration in 1922, and they create effectively a mandate. The French take effectively Syria, the British take everything else, and they name it Palestine. So today, when you see college students protesting under the notion of a return to the Palestinian state, guys, there was never a Palestinian state. It was a British mandate. And the 5,000 years of people living in Jerusalem, 3,000 of that is with Jewish influence. And so when people say from the river to the sea, that's a euphemism, in my view, for genocide. That is a notion of the Jewish people need to be forcibly removed from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. Wow, who in today's world that we live in believes that? And the pro-Palestinian demonstrators in some of our finest universities are really claiming pro-Hamas rhetoric. And I have to ask myself, where did those kiddos get that? What class did they go to that they forgot that Judaism has been in that area since the Bronze Age, since Abraham? And where did they get this notion that it's okay to somehow live with the notion of genocidal existential threats to a people? So, if you think about now, you have an Iranian piece of this, of people that believe themselves to be the rightful leaders in the region because they had an empire, and they believe they should be the hegemonic rulers of this. Now, the Arabs believe the same thing, the Turks believe the same thing, and those pesky Westerners that have been involved in and out of the Middle East, and the Israelis, are people that are looked at, we Americans, Israelis, Brits, French, are looked at as intruders into this whole thing. So what does that mean? What does it mean as we come up to today? Well, let's take a couple of examples. This is the largest petroleum reserves. This is over close to 60% of global petroleum reserves. The third largest economy in the world is Japan. Japan imports from here through the Straits of Hormuz, out into the North Arabian Sea, and across the Straits of Malacca, up the Philippine Sea by Taiwan into Japan, about 93% of their oil. 93%. China gets 70, 75, but they have pipelines that run across. So that's the number 2 and the number 3 economy. What happens if this is cut off? What happens to global economy and global equities and global supply chain if this is shut down? And if you look, you've got Kuwait at the top, you go around the Straits of Hormuz, off the UAE and Oman, out into the Arabian Sea, and out across the Indian Ocean. Down here at the bottom, you've got the Bab el-Mandeb, which is off of Aden in Yemen, and then up at the top, you have the Suez Canal. So what happens if you shut the Suez Canal down, you block the Bab el-Mandeb, and mine the Straits of Hormuz? Wow, what does that do to global economic issues? What does that do to global supply chains? So there's a lot of Americans. In my time in the Air Force, I used to catch a bit of grief on the Hill in testimony asking me, why do we care about the Middle East? Why don't we just leave? You know, I would always say, look, I'm from Texas. I think Texas could drill oil and gas. We don't need the rest of you people, but that's not the question. The question is, what happens to the global economy? What happens to global stability? So if you are an Iranian fundamentalist and you believe that the prophet has given these decisions to you and you want to be the hegemonic power in this region, then it doesn't bother you at all to mine the Straits of Hormuz and do the things that they're doing. And remember, during the Iran-Iraq war, the United States Navy sunk almost everything the Iranians had because they mined the Straits of Hormuz. So that's not lost on those guys. Remember, the Iranians are the same guys that took the American embassy and held our diplomats for 444 days. The Iranians are also the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad. There are 11 Shia militant groups sponsored by Iran. There are 7 Sunni terrorist groups sponsored by Iran. Okay, what does it mean if the Iranians get a nuke? What does it mean if the Iranians have the ability to employ a weapon like that? So why have multiple presidents of the United States, both parties, said the Iranians will never get a nuke? President Bush told us that one day in the tank, and he asked if we had any questions, and I said, sir, respectfully, I'm your airman here, and so what does that mean? When you say they will not get a nuke, do you want me to start developing target folders? What do you want us to do with that? President Obama said it, President Biden said it, President Bush has said it, President Clinton has said it. What does that mean? I mean, campaign rhetoric is one thing, but at the end of the day, the cold facts are, if you really believe they will not have a nuke, what does that mean? What do we do with that? So let's look at kind of where we go from here. And then I'm really interested in what y'all have to say. There's another set of players here. The Iranians believe, because they are Shia and they believe they are the rightful leaders of the faith, that they have a right to export that faith and that responsibility. So if you think about an arc that runs from the North Arabian Sea through Iran, through northern Iraq, into Syria and Lebanon, all across that, they are looking to create what they call a Shia arc. That takes us to close to 200 firings on American forces with drones and with missiles and rockets over the last 4 or 5 months. All up in Syria, northern Iraq, and across Israel and into Lebanon. The Arabs aren't buying that at all because they don't believe the Shia are the rightful leaders. The Turks aren't buying that at all because they believe their empire was sacrosanct as well. So within this mix, you have multiple entities inside Lebanon, most of them financed by Iran. You have northern Iraq influenced, and far southern Iraq influenced by Iran. You've got the Kurds mixed up into there. The Kurds have an entity within Iran, within Iraq, within Syria. The Turks and the Kurds don't get along. The Turks are firing on the Kurds in northern Iraq. You have Yemen with Iran financing the Houthis in Yemen. And remember, I believe it was 2016 or 2017, the Houthis and the Iranians fired on the Saudi oil production facilities and shut down 1/2 of the kingdom's oil production and transshipment. So now, what does all this mean? Let's get to this, and then I'm interested in what y'all have to say. So why the Middle East? Well, it's important because of global stability and global economy, global energy. It's not just about the United States. It's about everyone else. The location of it matters also. It's an intersection of faiths. It's an interesting intersection of geography. You've got Afghanistan all the way out to the east, Iraq all the way into the middle and the north. And then we've had combat going on for close to 34 years, from Desert Shield, Desert Storm, no-fly zones in the north, no-fly zones in the south, Iraq, Afghanistan, back to Iraq, back to Afghanistan. When in the history of the United States have we been in combat, continual combat, for 34 years? How many deployments is that? You know, I don't want to sound softy here, but how many anniversaries, birthdays, basketball games, how many of those we've missed? The unit that I commanded as a colonel at Eglin missed 5 straight Christmases. 5 deployed. So we've all got some skin in this game. So what does tomorrow mean? There's a Sunni Shia piece of this that hasn't played out. There's a GCC, which is the Arab side, Gulf Cooperative Council, on the west side of the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf. It has not played out, the competition between the Iranians across the Gulf. You've got the Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, who are the most aggressive in defending against Iranians. They'll come to Israel last. You've got the U.S. We've been involved in this since after World War II, up into the 50s. You've got Russia and China involved in this because of the energy and because of the resources, but also you now have this really interesting cooperative of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Until recently, we didn't think of them as a singular entity. We thought of them as 4 different players. But now, because of the Ukraine and because of what's going on in Israel, you have North Korean munitions and technology go into Iran. You have Russian and Chinese capabilities go into Iran, Iranian capabilities, Chinese and North Korean capabilities go into Russia because of the Ukraine. So Moscow, Beijing, Tehran, and Pyongyang now are not separate entities, they're cooperative entities. What does that mean for the future of combat in the Ukraine and Eastern Europe, and what does that mean with what's going on with Israel? And then, the last thing before we get to Israel, what about nukes? Does that change the game? Boy, I would suggest that's a big change. I was in the Pentagon when the airliner hit it, so I survived that terrorist attack, and we lost 3,000 Americans that day. But if Al-Qaeda had a nuke, Or more simple, we lost 3,000 Americans, but what if they could have killed 30,000 or 300,000? They would have done it. They were only limited by the blast effect of a Boeing airliner. And being in the building when that airliner hit, it wasn't a fun day. And remember, people are criticizing a set of players today about civilian casualties and et cetera, et cetera. We lost 3,000 Americans, and within a year, we were burning the place down. We invaded Afghanistan. We went after people in Iraq. We went after these people in the Middle East, and I wouldn't change that. So now, nukes are not the future of this. If the Iranians get a nuke, the Saudis will go nuke. The Emiratis will go nuke. We know the Israelis have nukes. What's that going to look like in the Middle East where the largest petroleum reserves are for a global economy? So let's talk about Israel. There are people that I think truly, in some of our academic institutions, they truly believe that the state of Israel is some kind of an aberration, that it was either made up or Palestinian land was illegally taken, and the Israelis have effectively been squatters in this. It couldn't be further from the truth. The United Nations voted to split this up and give the Jewish people a homeland, give them back the homeland that they had been there for 3,000 years. And the Palestinians continue to have an issue with that partition. But they continually talk, and I was a part of those talks too, and had a chance to negotiate with them. There's always the notion of the return to the property and the reparations for loss of property, the right to return, et cetera. But what about the millions of Jewish followers that from Morocco through Tunisia, Libya, up into Europe and across Turkey? What about all of those people that were displaced? Who cares about them? Isn't there some notion of proportionality in this? So a nuke is not a good thing. The JCPOA that the Obama administration negotiated with the Iranians and then the president signed was an attempt, and I think with all good faith, was an attempt to delay the development of a nuke and to try to bring the Iranians back into normal dialogue and normal relations. But what it did not do, it did not delay the refining of material quality-wise to build a weapon. It did not mention the terrorism. It did not mention ballistic missile technology or the export of those weapons. President Trump canceled it, but remember when President Obama signed that, he did not take it to the Congress because he knew he'd never get it through the Congress to be ratified. President Trump canceled it, President Biden brought it back, and I think this is an attempt to try to get the Iranians to talk. It's an attempt to get the Iranians to walk away from this support of terrorism, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really about a nuke. It's about ballistic missile technology and terrorism. You know, and there's no other way to say that. So let's talk about Israel. Over the last day or so, the Izzies have taken about 300 rounds. The main airfield that my wife and I spent quite a bit of time at was the primary target of those strikes. Let's go back to October 7th. Let's go back to October 6th, the day before Hamas struck the Israelis. I'm not willing to blame the Israelis for lack of intelligence. I'm not willing to blame the Israelis that this was an intelligence failure as much as perhaps as many sensors as they had and as much information they had is perhaps an analysis failure. And perhaps if they had it to do over again, they would be looking in different places. I mean, who would have predicted hang gliders, and who would have predicted all of the things that Hamas had practiced and rehearsed and had done? But let's also not forget that the close to 2,000 people killed that day proportionally to a population of 9 million versus one of 330 million is almost like losing 45 to 50,000 Americans. We lost 3,000 Americans and we burned the place down. What if we'd have lost 50,000 Americans? That's what the Israelis lost. And it wasn't just clean kills, it was barbaric barbarism. And so now we have an entire world of academia and supporters of Palestine that somehow want to brush that aside to talk about the occupation of Palestine and the notion of from the river to the sea. I don't understand that logic. And I've lived out there. My first assignment out there was 1992. So what's that, 32 years? I think I've seen a bit of this. I used to get the daily lecture from the chief of the Saudi defense staff, who was a great guy. But I used to get the obligatory Palestinian lecture on the poor Palestinians and the atrocities committed against them. And remember, the people that have killed the most Palestinians have been fellow Muslims. The guy that went after the Palestinians harder than anybody else are the Jordanians. Black September, all of the business that led up to Munich in 1972 was a result of the Jordanians going after the Palestinians in those camps. Okay, so who is supportive of the Palestinians? When I used to get the daily lectures, I would always ask him, well, sir, how much money have the Saudis forwarded? Are we building clinics? Are we building schools? Are we building hospitals? Are we building infrastructure? No. Why aren't we doing that for the Palestinian people? We collectively, as a global entity, why aren't we doing that? And his answer later, once he got really comfortable with me, was, well, because they'll just blow it up. And I said, well, you're criticizing us for the treatment of the Palestinians, but you're doing nothing because you say they'll just blow it up. He goes, well, to be honest, we don't particularly like those guys. And I went, well, that's not the, for me, that's not the point. Why don't we try to mitigate this? Why don't we try to figure out a way around this? But remember, every time we would get close, we Americans and Israelis, on a Palestinian state, the Palestinians would reject it. They have 3 times. I'm not, please understand, I'm not down or I'm not angry or I'm not dismissive of this Palestinian issue because it's terrible. Look what Hamas has done to the people of Gaza. They say now 30,000 civilians have died. Then why does Hamas put munitions and command and control facilities under schools, under hospitals? And why do they hold the Palestinian people in Gaza as a hostage? I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't know even how to address the argument. Up until early October, somewhere between 50 and 60% of the population of Gaza supported Hamas. I don't know what that is now. I don't know what that looks like. So I think that's kind of where we are right now. Again, the last day and a half or so, 300 rounds, drones and missiles fired at Israel. Israel's able to defend itself, but we're also beginning to see a lot more pushback on Israel, demanding an immediate ceasefire. If somebody had killed 45, 50,000 Americans, would we be looking for a ceasefire? I don't think so. If I were an Israeli senior officer, I would say, I'll talk about a ceasefire where 3 conditions are met. I want the hostages back or their remains. I want the terrorists that perpetrated this attack on my people, and I want the leadership of Hamas. We're going to give the terrorists and the leadership to the International Criminal Court and let that play its way out. I want the hostages back, and I want the bodies. Well, Hamas as of yesterday, the day before, and the Wall Street Journal was saying, or the intel folks were saying, Hamas the people are not mostly alive now. Most of the hostages are probably gone. There's 133 of them, I believe. And by the way, I think there's either 5 or 6 Americans. Americans were killed in the attack, and we've got 5 or 6 Americans. So let me get off the stage by saying, maybe it's time to get a glass of cold ice water and take a little break here and say, okay, the ceasefire is not going to work. If I were an Israeli senior officer, I'd say, no, hell no. We're not going to do this till we get the hostages, we get the terrorists, and we get the leadership. Interesting, yesterday, the day before, we whacked the number 2 or number 3 guy's family, and the New York Times and other newspapers went crazy that we were attacking civilians. Not we, but the Israelis. Wait a minute, wasn't that the guy that planned the 7 October? And then there was critique on the Israelis for killing the aid workers. But remember, a day or two after the exit from Afghanistan, the Americans, we whacked a white van and killed a family of 10 because we mis-ID'd it. This warfare business is not clean. This warfare business is not black and white. This warfare business is not easy. This is messy. And it's emotional, and it's everything that is wrong with this. But we, all of us, globally, have to find a way to mitigate this pain on the people that live in Gaza, because in some respects, it's not their fault. However, the hostages come home, the terrorists are handed over, Hamas leadership is handed over. Can you imagine a world if Hamas is allowed to live and grow back? What does that look like to Israel, to Egypt, to Saudi Arabia, etc.? And Israel and Saudi Arabia were this close to signing an accord. Was that the reason Hamas hit when they did? Could be. What happens when the moderate Arab states sign accords with Israel, trade begins, things begin to happen? What does that do to Shia Iran? If we were in Tehran, we would be saying that's not good. We can't let that happen. So we Americans, I believe, have a role in this. I think we Americans support our friends. I think we Americans do everything we can do to mitigate these challenges. Turkey is a NATO member. Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, we've been there since the 1950s. UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman. We need to figure out a way to bring Iran, the people of Iran, out of this nightmare that they're in. How do we do that? That's kind of a $64,000 question. But this, now let's go back to the beginning, and then I'm interested in what y'all have to say. Persian Empire, Ottoman Empire, Arabic Empire, colliding in the year 2024. Sunni, Shia, Christian, Jew, colliding in the year 2024. Jerusalem, center point. Al-Aqsa Mosque, Dome of the Rock, colliding. So when we sit back in our comfortable chairs in Dallas, Fort Worth, and we watch the news and we think, oh, how tragic that is, what does that mean to us? What does that mean as we're coming up in an election year? What does that mean to an administration, either the current one that comes back or whoever wins? What does this mean? So I'm not leaving you with an unanswered question. I'm leaving you with a kind of a rhetorical notion of this is not just something that is happening on the back burner. This is centuries of dialogue and interaction and competitive notion. This is who runs this region. Is it Tehran? Is it Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Is it Turkey? Is it a collection? Where do we fit? Where does Israel fit? Etc. So guys, that's kind of how I see it. Fascinating. So let me shut down here, and I'm really, really looking forward to what y'all have to say. By the way, while we're waiting for a question, do y'all realize that the University of Texas comes to College Station on 30 November this year?
Chief, thank you. Thanks for that great walk around the Middle East. It's a troubling place, and it's nice to, good to have you put that in perspective for us. Question for you, looking at the map, the biggest place is right in the center, Saudi Arabia. You mentioned the discussions on normalization of relations with Israel prior to October 7th, but since then, the Saudis have been kind of silent. Couldn't they play a bigger role in the region?
John Campbell, I think they play a big role. I think typical Saudi fashion, though, they don't want to be on the front page. The Saudis want to have the influence in the region that they believe they're due. And remember, in the King of Saudi Arabia's duty title is the protector and overseer of the holy sites. They take that very serious. That's Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem is the other site, and there's two more that are Shia sites in Iraq. But the Saudis take this very serious. But they also don't want to lay down and allow the Shia element of their faith to take control of the region. And that, for all of us sitting in this comfortable room, that seems like an abstract. But to them, that is not an abstract. It is the leadership of the faith. It is who controls the faith. Are the Saudis, is Saudi Arabia a fun place to live? Oh, no. Far from it. Is it a complicated place? Yes. Could we Americans be dealing with the Saudis in a way to bring up the influence? I think we could. But remember, after the alleged killing of the journalist, the current administration spun down to a notion of almost visceral hatred of the kingdom. We need to get over that. We need to work with the Saudis. We need to deal with the Saudis, the Emiratis, Bahrain, Qatar, Omanis, because this Iranian thing is not going to go away. The Saudis could be a big balance. Yep.
Yeah, General, I'm going to ask you the question that a lot of people are asking, which is, okay, they fired 300 rounds, missiles, whatever, at the Israelis. We shot down some. The Brits shot down some. The French shot down some. A, what are the Israelis going to do? And B, what do we do?
I think what you're going to see the Israelis do is not much different than what they're doing now, because remember, on their northern border, you've got Hezbollah and some people say 300,000 missiles up there. On their western border, they're engaged in effectively hand-to-hand combat in southern Gaza right now to try to find these terrorists and find the leadership. They're also concerned about resupply of their ordnance. And Washington of late has kind of put some markers down about continued support for them unless they do the following 4 or 5 things. And I don't think the Israelis are going to be, I don't think they're going to go down that road. They're worried, worry is not the right word. They're focusing on potential problems with Hezbollah. They're focused on potential problems out of Iraq and out of Syria and the current goings-on in Gaza. But also they hit back. And so Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, Hamas are sponsored. Hamas, in the Wall Street Journal yesterday or this morning, said that over $200 million has been handed over to Hamas to conduct these operations. Where did the Iranians get that money? Oh, that's right, we gave it to them. So I don't think you'll see, well, I don't want to be the predictor, but I think what I would do if I were the Israelis, I would respond in kind, but I would withhold as much ordnance and as much strength as I can, because you don't know what's going to come out of southern Lebanon and Syria. What should we do? I think we should make it very clear, military to military, that what do you need and how fast do you need it, and we'll get it to you. And I think at the same time we need very clear diplomatic messages, either out of the UN or out of Washington, and we need very clear tightening of the sanctions on this Iranian regime. Everybody and every single Iranian leader that is involved in this, we need to hit them pretty hard and keep hitting them. We need to try to isolate the leadership of Iran from the people of Iran. And we've had several opportunities to support the people of Iran, and we have not taken it. I think there's an escalatory piece of this too. If it gets really, really rough, you go after the Revolutionary Guard, you go after their fast boats, you go after, I mean, there's places you go that you don't put at risk the Iranian people. Because the Iranian people, you know, I don't want to sound like a softie, because I'm not, but this is not the Iranian people. This is the leadership in Tehran. I would work the sanctions, I would work the money side. You know, and if you go back and look over the last 10 or 15 years, it's not, your life expectancy as an Iranian nuclear engineer has not been good. There's ways to deal with this. But it takes an administration, either one, Republican, Democrat, it takes an administration that sees this region like we're talking about tonight. This is not something that is over the horizon and only let the academics worry about it. This is something that touches us. Out of this region came 9/11 for us. And out of this region, we walked away from Afghanistan, and now look what's happened. You know, et cetera. So I think, to answer your question, if I were the Israelis, I would maintain a presence and I would respond in kind. But you've got to be able to withstand what's about to happen to them. And don't think that every Israeli officer doesn't understand what happened in 1948, 1967, the War of Attrition in 1973, and the Intifada. They know. Does that make sense? Yes, sir.
Howdy, sir. So we've seen throughout history that in order to most effectively fight a war, you have to have the support of the populace. Public opinion is very diverse and not in full support of this. So what can be done to shift public opinion to better support the efforts to deal with Iran and their proxies?
Part of it, I believe, is a colossal misunderstanding. When you have young people your age out in the streets screaming death to Israel and from the river to the sea, those are genocidal statements. At what point did somebody who grew up in a safe family that's going to a wonderful college, at what point did that young lady or that young man believe it's okay to support genocidal activity? I don't know. I don't know what happens in classrooms with professors, with students. I don't know what happens that becomes an acceptable norm. Or the knucklehead that we've seen on TV last week up in Dearborn, Michigan, screaming as loud as he could, "Death to America," while he's in Michigan, screaming, "Death to America, death to Israel." I think a lot of what we're seeing now in that Dearborn, Michigan area, because of a high percentage of people with Islamic faith, is an electoral notion seeking votes in November. I'm saying that knowing that I sound cynical, but I think that's a lot to it. I think this administration is looking to ensure that they get as maximum number of votes as they can in those districts up there around Dearborn and Detroit, because Michigan is such a key state. And that pains me to even say that. When you attack a village in Israel and hack a baby up with an axe, and you make assault on women a policy decision, and you get 133 hostages, and we don't know how many of them are alive today, and you have this guy screaming, "Death to Israel, death to America," in Michigan. Wow. We've got a First Amendment, so the guy's got a right to be an idiot. But still, where did that come from? Or Harvard, or Princeton? I would almost bet you, for my sister and brothers from College Station, there's not been some yahoo out by Sully with a microphone screaming "Death to America." It might be tough to get out from that. I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. I don't know what generates that kind of uneducated, unenlightened hatred of somebody. Why is there this large anti-Semitic notion? I get it when people don't like the notion of Zionism, but all that is the Jewish people have a right to a state. To be anti-Jewish, where does that come from? Why is that fashionable? And what's the education process? I mean, we're Americans. We can't just lock all these people up and re-educate them. Where does that start? Does it start in the college professor's break room? Does it start in the journalism? I mean, I'm asking you guys. Y'all are front line of this as college students and ROTC, and where does that start? How do we get our arms around that? It's one thing to have a polite dialogue and to be civil and to agree or disagree, but boy, once you start screaming death to Jews and death to Americans, isn't that kind of crossing a line somewhere? I think so. Yes, sir.
Question regarding the issue of oil. We were energy independent under the Trump administration, and I think we could be back there again with proper leadership. So why or how can you justify American treasure and American lives to see that the oil in the Middle East is available to the rest of the world? Why doesn't the rest of the world, Europe in particular, pick up their part of the deal and ensure their own oil independence?
Thank you, sir.
I don't disagree with where you're going, but from my life out there, I believe there's more to it than that. Let me first off say the United States should be absolutely 100% energy independent. There is no question that we should be drilling, we should be extracting, we should be exporting, not just LNG, but we could provide the buffer to Europe that the Russians have shut down. We, the United States, could be net exporters of all things energy related. But it's going to take infrastructure, it's going to take pipelines, it's going to take drilling, it's going to, et cetera, et cetera. I believe that's where we should be. But please understand, Japan, the third largest economy and our closest ally in the Pacific, in my view, gets somewhere between 93 and 95% of its energy out of this place. That takes us to the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the World Investment Bank. It takes us to all of the things after World War II that we normalized relations amongst nations. That's a part of what this is about also, Russia, China, Iran, attempting to diminish America's role in kind of a normalized world order. If you look at the United States and Japan, the two GDPs is twice what China is. So if we view China as perhaps sometimes an aggressive competitor, how do we mitigate that in the Western Pacific? Well, part of that is Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, Australia. But if you crater their economy, not you, but if their economy is cratered, what does that look like? What does that mean? So I think this place is important, and I think it's important from a global perspective, but it's also important because the Americans, what did we learn prior to World War I? What did we learn prior to World War II? Every time we've been dragged into these things, it's cost us more people, more money, more lives, et cetera. So perhaps this is a place, using those established norms, Bretton Woods, World Trade, World Bank, et cetera, that we can make a difference relative to the bad guys that are trying to hurt us. We need to be independent, but we also need to be a part of solving the problem for our closest allies. Does that make sense? Whereabouts?
Thank you, sir, for being here. I just love to hear what you have to say, and I personally agree with almost everything you said. Just an observation and kind of a comment for this. The new axis of evil, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran. It just so happens that Vladimir Putin's birthday was October 7th. And there's been thoughts that maybe Iran did that for as a birthday present, caused Hamas to go and do that to take our attention away from Ukraine and resources away from Ukraine, which we're having difficulty figuring out how to support. Anyway, I'm just curious if you thought there was anything there.
Wow, I don't know. I don't know about Putin's birthday. Yeah, no, I'm not arguing that, but I don't know. I think this has got something more to do with the potential signing of an accord between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And I think it's got more to do with this desire for this arc that runs from Iran all the way across to Lebanon. And the Israelis, there are a million reasons the Iranians dislike the Israelis. Religiously, policy-wise, I mean, there's a list. They don't want them in the region. They have used the Israelis and the Jewish faith as kind of a stalking horse to make it appear that they are the true leaders of the Islamic faith and will not tolerate these colonial occupiers, even though the Israelis, the Jews were there centuries before the Prophet. There's no question Tehran, Pyongyang, Beijing, Moscow are working together, no question. And this is taking the United States effort and United States attention while the Ukraine is going on. Ukraine is taking American attention and effort while this is going on. So can we not walk and chew gum at the same time? I mean, I think for the next president, there needs to be a recognition that the American military is too old and too small. We need to be able to fight in two places and prepare and train for both. At the end of the Bush administration and the Obama administration, we went to one major conflict. One. So now, with munitions and supplies going to the Ukraine and here, we're less than that. And we have chaos on the southern border. You know, the last time it was this chaotic on the southern border, Woodrow Wilson invaded Mexico. Woodrow Wilson invaded Mexico. He shelled Tampico, he invaded Veracruz, and he sent John Pershing into northern Mexico for close to a year. So I think the American military needs to be modernized, recapitalized. I think the Army needs to be 500,000 trained, full up. The Navy needs to be 400 ships. The Air Force needs to be much more than it is. That's defense budgets, and that's outcome, and that's industrial base, et cetera.
Peace through strength.
Peace through strength. Sounds like a guy from 1980. Or in his words, we win, they lose. And we didn't fire on the Russians. I mean, I've had Russians try to kill me. A lot of us have, but I mean, we didn't go to battle stations on those guys. We just beat them economically, militarily. Why can't we do that? Why are we still operating this old equipment, and why are we American military so small? You're spot on.
Okay, Chief, we're going to take, by the way, I'm glad you got to the discussion of our military, because that's a whole other topic we could spend a long time on, but everything you said's dead on. We're going to take mercy on you and have one more question,
Yep.
and then Nathan?
Yes, sir.
So Israel has been on the defensive since 1948. I think the Arab states pretty much neutral. The head of the snake is Iran. Iran's behind Hezbollah, Hamas. Why can't Israel just come to the conclusion that it's a game of war? We cut off the head of the snake. Would the U.S. back Israel?
Well, that's a great question, and we've had that discussion with the senior American military for a long time. President Bush asked me one day in the tank there in the Pentagon, what would it take for you to whack the Iranians like you did Afghanistan and Iraq? I said, sir, it wouldn't be hard. I mean, we could go through the Revolutionary Guard forces, we could go through the regular military, Navy, Air Force, Army. That wouldn't be hard. He said, how long would it take? And I said, sir, nobody ever wants to tell the president how long it's going to take because there's so much you don't know until you get there. He goes, give me a guess. And I said, 2 weeks, 30 days. And I said, but sir, that's not the real question. The real question is what happens on the day after. The American military could take their military, but what happens on the day after, especially if they have a nuke? I think this is better off strangling the snake now with sanctions and realizing that a nuclear deal plays into the benefit of these mullahs in Tehran. Because the JCPOA, the first one, and the modified second one doesn't stop them from centrifuges and enrichment. It doesn't address ballistic missile exchanges, the ones fired at Israel in the last couple of days. It doesn't address exporting terrorism or support of terrorism. And you're right, it is a snake. But the people of Iran are not the problem. The people of Iran, I mean, they just want to raise their families and have a life. It's this mullah group that wrap themselves in Shia Islamic fundamentalism and find an enemy like the Jewish people or the Americans or the Europeans or the Saudis or other Arabs. Maybe since the 7th of October, the world sees these people a little more clear for what they really are. Maybe that's, I'm hedging because I don't have a direct answer for you, but maybe that's one of the ponies in this manure pile as people see the Iranians for what they really are. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
But you also have to be ready. You have to, if these guys begin to enrich, if they spin the centrifuges up and begin to enrich either plutonium or uranium, they're days away from a capability. So President Biden or President X, over to you. You guys have said every opportunity they will not get a nuke. Okay, sir. Over to you. That's a tough one. Guys, thank you.
General Moseley, thank you so much for being here with us, for spending time with us, for your insight and your experience are things that we as general public America don't get to hear. And so we're very grateful for you spending time with us. We've got a couple of parting gifts for you. We'll do this the right way. This is our Congressman Sam Johnson Defender of Freedom Award coin.
I thought you were going to give us 200 brand new F-22s.
We'll have to work on that. We'll also give you an official NDBS logo
cool.
shirt.
Very cool.
That should be your size, but if it's not, I'll fix it for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And then, of course, we're going to give half of the money for the drawing to the charity of your choice. You just tell me where to send it. I'll make sure it gets there.
Tunnel to Towers.
Tunnel to Towers. You got it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We want you up here. All right, we got to get you to draw. Here comes the draw. Okay, first we're going to